very high energy discussion. And in fact, I wish you all that it is on you to take it forward and make this a developed country. Thank you.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah. So first of all, welcome to all the participants, and thank you very much for inviting me as one of the panelists here. So yes, I will pick up the words what the participants have mentioned. So we call it, the triple bottom line sustainability principles. So these are social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So these are the three pillars, where we see sustainability. And this, when we are able to achieve sustainability in all these three spheres, then we will be able to, achieve a complete sustainable growth. So social, the economic, we have already crossed $4 trillion economy, and then definitely a lot more is sustainability. And this, when we are able to achieve sustainability in all these three spheres, then we will be able to, achieve a complete sustainable growth. So social, the economic, we have the clean drinking water, fresh air. There are a lot of things that needs to be provided. And the environmental. So Green Viksit Bharat, which is today's theme of panel discussion as well. So environmental sustainability is equally, very important. And since you all are the youth, and then, you will contribute to the growth of the country in future. So there will be a lot of, skills which will be required from your end, and then which will help in, contribute to the development of the nation. So wishing everyone all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those insightful perspectives. We already have seen a lot of diverse perspective on Green Viksit Bharat, which is exactly why this conversation is going to be very exciting and thought-provoking. So let us begin our conversation. I will start by asking Nabha Sirji, what are top 2-3 priorities India must focus to achieve Green Viksit Bharat by 2047?
You see, in my opening remarks, I have said that sustainable growth or development, there are 3-4 pillars. One is the environment sustainability. Next, your social sustainability, your economic sustainability. So these pillars will be the foundation for a Viksit Bharat. You have seen we always talk about maintaining an equilibrium between development and environment, development and forest, inclusive growth in the social sector. But I think in our country, what the young generation who are here is, if I can say, is still in a very nascent stage and even maybe a myth in certain sectors. It is very nice to hear maintaining balance, maintaining equilibrium, but on the ground, how much is being done or what needs to be done, and an approach and vision in formulating these development and Viksit Bharat needs to be taken into account, so that there is protection and conservation of environment, the economic factor, how we use, how the environment is affected, how we can strike a balance. No one is against growth, but each sector has to be given its due. And when it comes to the social sector, we need to have an inclusive growth, not of one or others. And particularly when we talk of our region, the Northeast, you see, one shoe fits all approach cannot be taken. We have our own intrinsic requirements, position, the terrain, the land. So due consideration should be given to that also. Since this is a program and all the 8 northeastern states, we should keep this in mind, and even from the central policies, these should be integrated while we take up the policy matters, so that our region, with its own intrinsic nature, the terrain and others, must be taken into consideration.
Very insightful, sir. Would any other panelist would like to build on that topic?
Okay, since you mentioned 2 points, yes, if you're
Or I
looking
said
at...
any points.
Okay. In fact, if you look at the narrative over here, it's my Bharat. Okay, I mean, it starts from there. The moment you use the word my, that means that sense of ownership has to be there. If you do not have that sense of ownership, then whatever you do becomes very superficial. So taking a cue from what Mr. Nava has said, yes, we need to be very realistic in our approach, which means that whatever vision that we have, it has to be very realistic. Our great forefathers who had framed the Constitution, if you look at it, in fact, at that point of time, when the Constitution was written, it had taken India in totality. That is where the convergence aspect, I mean, like in spite of the diversity in culture, in language, in religion, whatever the case may be. But if you look at our Constitution, it's very, very robust. But somehow or the other, I think so, we have missed out on that. Whatever approach that we are doing now, we have put the Constitution in the back burner. So I would urge upon the young people now, please go read the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution should be your next holy book. And that will actually give you a vision of what India is supposed to be. Because we have to live as one in spite of our various differences. If you look at like what Mr. Nava has said, Northeast is very different. Of course, over here we are having only among Northeast, but then suddenly when you have people from Madhya Pradesh, from Uttarakhand coming to Northeast, they see a totally different India. In fact, which is, for them, I mean, if you look at social and the cultural aspect, very difficult for them to digest. But then we are part of India. So we need to look India in totality, and whatever vision that we have, it has to be very, very realistic, taking into consideration the diversity that we have.
That was really, really...
All the participants, please either switch off your mobile or silent your mobile. It is looking very odd that you are watching your mobile, because live streaming is there, and in record already we get the photographs that so many of you are watching the mobile rather than listening the day's words. So please either switch off your mobile or make it silent and refrain you from watching the mobile.
So like you all also mentioned about economic development and environmental sustainability. How do we balance both? Like this is a question which everyone asks very often, and it is a very debatable topic these days that we hear. How do we balance economic growth and environmental sustainability? We'll start by Albert, sir.
So I think if Virat Kohli is playing an IPL match now, it's justified that you're on your phones now. And otherwise, this session is for you actually. The idea is that how do you balance? So the key word is we talk about balance, we talk about environmental friendly. Systems are in place. The first 2 panelists who just spoke in this second round are renowned environmentalists, and they're also part of the forest department. So actually the system is in place in the country where checks and balances do exist. Permissions have to be taken, clearances have to be also taken. You cannot just go and do whatever you want in any part of the country. So that part is sorted in the sense that, and India also is a signatory to the Paris Agreement, where more than 190 countries have agreed to keep global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. And just recently, India has also shared its nationally determined contributions, which are in terms of its climate ambitions, and they have further increased the share of renewable energy to the total energy mix to 60%, and also there is a serious attempt to bring down greenhouse gases emission. But as such, India is not very worried, or should not be worried about global warming, because as a net contributor, even in absolute terms, we are one of the lowest contributors to greenhouse gases. It is in fact Western countries where even smaller countries have been contributing much more GHGs, the greenhouse gases, simply because of their lifestyle. I think the focus here now should be that we should be looking at this youth, entire 42 crores of them, to upskill, bring them into the green skill path, get them to solve local problems in their villages, water management, energy management, and I think that should go a long way in creating not just Viksit Bharat, but more of a climate smart Bharat. Thank you.
Akhilesh, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for this. So I would like to add further to it. So India, I hope I can speak in Hindi as well.
Yes, you can, sir.
Okay, fine. So अभी आप इंडिया को देखेंगे यहाँ पर, तो in India we are still fighting for a lot of necessities. Necessity क्या है? आपका रोटी कपड़ा और मकान जो बोलते हैं वहाँ पर. So lot of population in India is still struggling. There are a lot of good government schemes which are providing houses, which are providing food to a lot of people. So एक इसमें concept रहता है यहाँ पर जो Maslow's pyramid कहते हैं. तो उसमें सबसे पहले जो सर्वाइवल के लिए किसी आदमी के लिए चाहिए होता है वो बेसिक नेसेसिटी रहती है. जब वो मीट होती है तो फिर आदमी जो रहता है नेक्स्ट लेवल पे मूव करता है, उसे फिर लग्जरी में जाता है, फिर उसके बाद सेल्फ एक्चुअलाइजेशन का फेज आता है. तो अभी इंडिया की काफ़ी पॉपुलेशन जो है स्टिल एट द बॉटम ट्राइंग टू मीट दी नेसेसिटी. सो इंडिया का स्टैंड जो हमेशा रहता है वहाँ पर जो क्लाइमेट चेंज नेगोशिएशंस में है, that is that India's emissions are necessity based. So whatever emissions, most of it what we are making is to meet our basic necessities like food, like housing, and there are some luxury as well, but mostly it is for that. So if you see the per capita or per person GHG, greenhouse gas emissions from India, it will be much lesser than the Western countries. So the Western countries are developed, they have already, moved away from the necessity phase. They are into luxury and self-actualization, all those phases of this Maslow's pyramid. So now, the emissions that we are making in India is completely, justified, according to me, to meet. So that is why when we call about, balance between development and environment, this will, take some more time because we need to meet the basic need of the people in India. So that is very important according to me. So that is my views on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was really insightful session. And with this, I would like to begin with open discussion, open questions. We'd like to take some questions from the audience. They were very excited and enthusiastic to ask you questions, but we received a lot of questions because of time constraints. They also have to do other stuff, so we could not really take a lot of questions. But I would be calling the names of the participants whose questions we'd be taking. Simran Gogoi from Assam. Can any volunteer please pass the mic to her?
Good morning, sir. Actually, my question is that how India can balance rapid economic growth and environmental sustainability, as you have told in earlier, before I ask the question. So actually my concern is about as I am a zoology student, so I watch birds. So due to my concern in our Lakhimpur, we have various wetlands. So there are numerous activities going on like making of bridges, so due to which some migratory birds are slowly declining and the numbers of birds are becoming very low. So I am very concerned about this. So I want to ask you that how can we balance in low level, just as like rural and urban areas for us and us for our Viksit Bharat?
Thank you, Simran. Yes, it is. This is a issue which actually has conflicted the concept of development vis-a-vis environmental conservation. Coming straight to the point, I mean, how can we go about in controlling this or in addressing this? Somehow or the other, I feel that we have disregarded traditional knowledge. You can take a seat, it's okay. We have discarded traditional knowledge. If you look back at our ancestors, just at our grandparents, we don't have to go too far, you will find that their understanding of conservation, their understanding of environmental protection is of a very, very high level. That is why conservation of wetlands, conservation of, rather protection of sacred groves, of sacred forests, and then of preservation of water bodies. For them, it's like what one of my panelists has mentioned, it is a necessity, no doubt. But then if you look at the way they had brought in certain rules or rituals by saying, don't do this, if you do this, this is going to happen to you, that has in fact invoked a sense of fear in people, which in turn translated into environmental protection. When we look at developmental projects, unfortunately, in the present context, we are driving actually into overgear, looking at the developed countries and trying to catch up with them. And disregarding traditional knowledge which has conserved, preserved the environmental aspect of that particular region. So that is why if you look at the way forward, we need to start, actually you young people, I mean you're still in college and maybe you'll be going to university, look at doing research from those aspects. Traditional knowledge in conservation. And that will be a very, very good rule book that will take forward whatever environmental impact assessment, whatever study that's going to be undertaken before a project comes into existence. In the context of Northeast, I think so Mr. Nawa also will subscribe with me. When any developmental project comes, the biggest problem we have is data. We do not have any documented data that we can bank on and say, look, this is what it is pre-project, and how do you envisage, or rather, how do you come about in the impact assessment looking at your baseline data? We don't have any baseline data. So that is why when we look at projections, we have to base on records of other countries, other states, which may not be relevant to us. So that is the biggest drawback. So if we are going to look at a balanced developmental aspect vis-a-vis environmental conservation, we need to start documenting traditional knowledge when it comes to environmental conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Lily Lalan Colley from Mizoram.
Sir, could you please share your opinion on one small change we all people can make to help the environment?
Whom are you asking this question?
Ambit, sir.
Albert, sir.
Thank you. And also, I'm grateful that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has already provided the guidelines for that. It's called the Mission Life, so lifestyle for environment. So basically, it looks at individual choices, you can sit actually, individual choices making an impact. So essentially that how you have your date, whether you choose to use plastic or not, whether you choose to walk to college or take a bus or go in your private car. So basically it is saying that if you have a population of 140 crores and 140 crores citizens choose eco-conscious living and also in the products that you choose. Now the government is also planning to start eco-mark labeling of products. You also get a lot of advertising that you see that we are environmentally friendly mall or we are a net zero mall. And some campuses are also claiming to be net zero, and rightly so, because they do not emit carbon in the net sense. And I hope that answers your question. I think it starts essentially with your choices, and you as a youth and as a voter and as a big group here, you can actually force your representatives who are the MLAs or the MPs to also bring that change in the discourse in your society. Thank you.
This is something that we all can imbibe in us, asking questions, being more available and learned. Next up is Mriganka
I'll just
Gogoi
add,
from...
I'll just add, Lily,
Sir.
forget about industrial development, you're not working in industry, look at your daily life. Let us be waste-wise. The route that you travel every day from your house to your institution, to your church, to your place of worship, to the market, let us be conscious and be more responsible to the waste that we generate. Let us start with that. The moment we are responsible for the things that we generate, that is the beginning. Okay? So that is more practical for you.
Thank you, sir. Mriganka Gogoi from Assam.
Good morning and greetings to the member of the House. While renewable energy is crucial for sustainable future, I want to ask you that how we balance between a large-scale green infrastructure development and preservation of ecosystem plus renewable water sources, and especially in vulnerable economical zones.
So to summarize his questions, he's asking about new renewable energy and how we can do the resource management. Sir, please.
Yeah, renewable energy you have seen in the country for the last 10, 12 years. There has been a lot of thrust on renewable energy. Now, of course, your question was not very clear. You see, renewable energy is one part of bridging that gap, which I told in my opening remarks, your development and environment. And Vanchan will agree, we have worked together for many years. You see, we have seen, and this is very important for the youth who are here, we have many facets, like one of our panelists who had said here, that we have number of rules, regulations, notifications. In paper, I think the Indian laws and acts are among the best, if not the best. But the question comes on the compliance of those acts and rules, adhering to them, and above all, implementing those. And here, the role of youth is very, very important. Many of you, I'm sure, may not be aware also what is a EIA notification. And because, I'll be very candid, when you are concerned about your environment, you also need to read, study, and also formulate your own approach. And Vanchan very rightly pointed out, because we have moved out from our traditional system and values which existed. In the process of people not being aware or dissemination of information to these various rules and acts, I have been for last 6 years as chair of the State Expert Appraisal Committee on Environment. Number of projects from mining to industries to road projects we take up. But every time we find an OM, office memorandum, the main act is being diluted on a monthly basis. I'll not say on a quarterly basis also. And my young friends who suffer, which sector suffers, the interest of which sector is sacrificed, it is environment and forest. Every time we have seen such dilution happening. For example, in the EIA, they say when you have a road construction, if it is 1,000 feet above the MSL and till 1,000 feet, you do not need an EIA study. Which, as I said earlier, it should be lowered down, particularly for our northeastern states, considering our terrain, our water bodies, and other factors, environmental issues concerned. So these are the issues which the youth can take up. From our side, we write how much action being taken, we do not know, very little. So there has to be the youth voice should come up. And all of you, since you are concerned, only concerned and going out of this hall and forgetting will not help. You need to take up on a daily basis and including your daily life, because protection, conservation, all this starts at home. You might have seen we clean our home and we throw the garbage into our neighbor's house or into the drain flowing down. That should not be. It should start from your home to the community, to your city, and to your state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Rightly mentioned, it is our collective responsibility to be conscious, do more, to learn more, to read about, be informed. And next up we have Samrat Saha from Assam.
Good morning, everyone. I am from Assam, myself Samrat Shah. So my question to the panelists are how the grassroots initiatives like Ek Ped Maa Ke Naam empower ordinary citizens to move from awareness to daily environmental actions, and what policy supports are needed to scale such efforts nationwide.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. So I think yes, awareness, creation is one of the most important thing, because we also closely work with a lot of community members, across Meghalaya for planting trees. So we feel that a lot of awareness is required on the ground towards environment and how to achieve sustainability. So there can be a lot of things done when we will have to work closely with the community. We'll have to identify the grassroots or the institution, because a lot of people mentioned participants here about the diversity. So India is a very diverse country, and in different states there might be different community-based institutions. So how we can involve, look into it, and then create awareness for the communities. That is one of the very key important thing to increase our outreach to the people to deliver tell them about the awareness about environment. So different things, initiatives can be taken by a different organization. Definitely the government is doing a lot towards it. So yes, that is, I think, one of the, very key important parameters that we also feel that is required currently at the ground level to increase the awareness.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, please.
You see, you talked about ek pair maa ke naam. That itself is like a revolution. When you plant a tree in your mother's name, number one, whether you like it or not, like Bhawanshan said, in our state, we have the traditional system where there are strict do's and don'ts. Maybe it has been diluted now. Within a village, we had the Lao Adong, Lao Ningdo, Lao Niam, all this. And these were all areas earmarked, which will be the catchment, which will be the water source, which will be the sacred grove where we cannot go. So this is in a broader aspect, and I think taken out from our traditional system. When you see ek pair maa ke naam, so the tree which you planted may not be destroyed, but wherever in your state, in your area of work, whenever you see such trees being felled, that time you will feel that I had also planted in my mother's name, but I have protected it, but in other areas it is not being protected. So it is not a mere slogan, it is an emotion, it is a sentiment which carries and gives a motivation and inspiration to particularly to all of you young people, that even planting one tree can make a difference before you go to 5, 6, 8, 10, and that is concern for the future.
Priyanka Chakrabarti from Assam.
Greetings, sir. My name is Priyanka Chakrabarti. I'm from Guwahati, Assam, and I'm an environmentalist too. I have represented India at COP30 recently, and I have been involved with IPCC and UNFCCC as well. I'm currently pursuing bachelor's in political science, and my question is, what are, the role of government in order to government policy basically, in order to encourage green and eco infrastructure and mobility solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. The role of the government is to make rules. Simple as that. And the role of the citizens is to understand these rules and implement them. See, this is a big difference. Many a times, we say, what is the government doing? But who's the government? If I ask you now, does the government have a name? Priyanka has a name. Sorry, I'm taking your name. Priyanka has a name. Lily has a name. Simran has a name. Government has no name. Please remember this. In the end, it's the attitude of an individual who has a name in taking the vision forward and having what we call now that green Viksit Bharat. It's very unfortunate in the 21st century, we are aspiring for something that our ancestors actually had preserved. If you look 50 years, 60, 70 years, I mean, even at the time of independence, across India, it was green. That slogan was never coined at that point of time. Why? Because everybody accepted, like again, coming back to my core aspect of traditional knowledge, we respected traditional knowledge, we respected traditional ethos, and we made sure that those are being conserved and preserved. But then over a period of time in the name of development, in the name of advancement, we have forgotten all that. So government, yes, they've come up with a lot of policies, like Government of India now coming up with this program itself. And it's, I don't know whether it's ironical or not, calling it My Bharat. Suddenly we've forgotten, I mean, after so many years of independence, we are coming back with My Bharat. Please remember the word my, it personifies yourself. And if you cannot look from that aspect, I think so you need to relook at your whole life again. I mean, like, where do I take myself forward? If you're not being able to personally take that message within you and say, look, this is my dream for what India is going to become, then any government policy, any government rules and regulations will just be in paper. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Mala Swamswali from Mizoram.
A very good morning to respected panelists and all the members of the House. I would like to ask Ambassador that how is the clean energy transition contributing to climate change in India?
So as a matter of fact, the transition that is happening has been gradual, and what we expect is that it should be just so that you do not lose out on livelihood opportunities. So India, as you know, has a very mixed basket of depending on coal and hydrocarbon fuels. And now of late, there's been a huge push to solar energy. If you look at the large tracts of Gujarat and Rajasthan are also having these large solar farms. But as you can see that over the last 1 month, that I think the general discussion in your house has been about the LPG cylinder, which needs to be poked, which needs to be filled up. But that is coming all the way from the Middle East. So as such, we are not self-sufficient entirely. No country is, in fact, because it's a very mixed basket. So while the climate action is important, we are also now transitioning into solar, as I mentioned. So electricity now is getting cleaner and cleaner as the day goes by, which is good. And in states like, suppose, Mizoram or even Meghalaya for that matter, and even Arunachal, the electricity being generated also is 100% green. That is, it is dependent on hydroelectricity. Other states are more dependent again on thermal sources such as coal. So to answer your question briefly, it means that we are looking at a slow and gradual move towards an ability to be self-sufficient, number one. And once you're self-sufficient, then you'll be able to reach the scale of Scandinavian countries like Norway and Sweden, which are 100% green. But they have invested lots of money and time in hydro, wind, as well as solar energy. So I think we're getting there. You might be able to see, when you get old perhaps, that you will see that India might actually be 100% green. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Inti Mongla from Nagaland.
Good morning, panelists and all the members present here. I am from Nagaland and my name is Imti Mongla. So the question here is, what specific green skills should students be learning now to be ready for the jobs that will drive a sustainable Indian economy in 2047?
Yes, sir, please.
Yes, so I can definitely tell you, some of it, because we do a lot of plantation, we work for different, sectors. So definitely environment, forestry, agriculture, these all are very important, backgrounds that we look for. But apart from that, we use a lot of technology. So everyone can contribute, to the environmental growth. So if you say we do a lot of remote sensing, we do a lot of, satellite data analysis. We look, because if you see environment, it might seem like, planting tree or, waste management or that, but, behind that, a lot of thing goes on. So lot of expertise from different, sectors and domain is required for that. So if you say, like remote sensing, satellite data analysis, that is one of the important part that we extensively use, for planting and for different, other environmental studies. Softwares, because once you do, manage this plantations or any, other environmental activities, lot of, software development is required, and, good softwares are required for that. So we actually work with lot of, software developers on the ground, and to develop, different kind of application to cater to the needs of environmental sector. We work with, lot of drone pilots. We operate lot of, high survey grade based drones. So drone, we don't get too many, good expert drone pilots on the ground. So definitely, that is another skill set that is required a lot going forward in the future. Data analytics part, it might look like, we don't do, like we just simply plant the trees, but a lot of data flows into the system, and it has to be, analyzed properly to do, make informed decisions, how we can, improve day by day, year by year. So data analytics is another very critical part of this environmental. And believe me, we don't have too many experts. If we talk about the environmental sector, who works on these spheres, like, so we have to, we continuously work with software engineers and all these experts, and then try to develop their skills so that they understand, because they are dealing in natural things, which is very different from, might be other things which are very material, like, maybe constructing a building. So natural things work very differently, and different kind of, skill set, and then that thinking is required for that. So we slowly, we work with them, and then we tell them all these engineers about like what is the requirement from this angle. And also, we recently we have started using a lot of artificial intelligence. So we are working, we have AI-based, software engineers as well working with us. We are working for sapling detection automation. We are working for some unsupervised models for, 3D modeling of the trees and saplings. So, lot of technology goes into this sector as well. So these are, some of the areas definitely where a lot of, skill sets and will be required in future, who can, correlate nature with the technology part. So we will definitely be needing, a lot of experts. And then a lot of you will be engineers, will be remote sensing experts. So you can definitely, utilize your expertise and skill sets towards this. So I think, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to add what Mr. Akhilesh said. I think your question was basically related to your syllabus or the stream in which you are studying and how you can contribute, if I'm not wrong. So I'll give you a small example. You see, most of the development projects in the country today require something which is known as the environment clearance. Of course, depending on the threshold limit, the size, say if it's a mining, the size of the area and all this. Beyond that, there is a huge scope for students from the environment, agriculture, and other even technical engineering background for evaluation. You see, certain stipulations are given. Suppose you go for a mining project, and there are certain stipulations where you have to create green belt over 33% of the area where your mining take place, for example. Now, this compliance is very, very important, or even compliance under the Air and Water Act. It is given in the stipulation in the environment clearance which you get. You find 20, 25, 30, 40 conditions which are given. But whether these conditions are being followed has to be taken up and can be taken up, and there is a huge opening as far as the third-party audit is concerned. And I'm in one of the committees which Government of India has constituted to have the third-party audit on all those development projects, irrespective of whether they require environment clearance or not. So this is where you can play a very, very important role. It could be a carrier, and at the same time, it also meets your requirement and desire and your ambition and your vision to see that this balance is maintained. So I think all of you, irrespective of sectors we are, it is coming very shortly, this third-party audit, which is very important. Everyone, like Bhawanshan said, government cannot do everything. Government cannot provide all the manpower. So I think the youth, also our demographic dividend, has and can play a very pivotal role in this.
Thank you so much, sir. We would not be able to take any more questions because of time constraints. And I would like to conclude by saying today's discussion reminds us that building a green Viksit Bharat is not just a responsibility of few, but a collective responsibility. Especially, it requires the active participation of young people, young minds. On behalf of everyone, I would like to thank all our panelists for their valuable insights and our audience for their active participation. Let's continue this conversation beyond this room and turn ideas into action. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.
It's not working. Thank you so much, Ms. Pallavi Singh, for moderating the session. And I would also like to thank all the panelists of the day for their amazing time, for the amazing insights to the youth of our Northeast present out here today. I hope the youth get to learn so many new things and new insights from our dear panelists today. And with this, I would like to request for a group photograph. Thank you so much, sir. Now with this, we are moving towards the second session of the day. The theme, human capital, investment in education, skill development, and employment. And I'm going to moderate this session number 2. For this, I would like to welcome our panelists for today on this stage. I would like to request Dr. Benjamin Langdon, Professor of Northeast Hill University, to kindly grace to the stage. Please, sir. Followed by our panelist number 2, I would like to request Sri Audrey Konglang Ma'am, District Skill Development Officer, to kindly be on the stage. And our third panelist of the day, Father Michael McCree, Director of Don Bosco Youth Center. I'd like to request Father to please be on the stage. I would like to request all the participants to kindly keep their mobile phones in silent or airplane mode, because we are going to start this session soon, and please maintain the decorum of the hall. As we move forward, I would like to request our Regional Director, sir, to kindly felicitate our panelists for the day.
Dr. Benjamin Langdon, Professor of Northeast Hilly University. Shri Audrey Konglam, District Skill Development Officer. Dr. Michelle Makri, Director of Don Bosco Youth Center. With this, let's begin with our next panel discussion on the theme Human Capital, Investment in Education, Skill Development and Employment. It will be moderated by Bhumika.
Hello. Thank you so much, Ms. Pallavi Singh. Good afternoon, everybody present out here, honorable dignitaries, our panelists for the day, and my dear youth. I am Bhumika Chetri, and I'm going to moderate the session 2, which is Human Capital, Investment in Education, Skill Development, and Employment. With this, let me introduce you to our panelists today. We have panelist number 1, Dr. Benjamin Langdon. He is Associate Professor in Department of Tourism and Hotel Management, Northeast Hill University, Shillong. He has teaching and research experience of more than 20 years. We would like to welcome sir to the session. Please we have a huge round of applause for Dr. Benjamin Langdon. Our panelist number 2, Audrey Konglang ma'am, Skill Development Officer of East Khasi Hills District, representing Meghalaya State Skill Development Society. She has been a part of skill development for more than decades, implementing skill development. We would like to welcome ma'am to the panel today. And our panelist number 3, we have Father Michael Makri. He is a Salesian priest of Don Bosco and a dynamic youth leader based in Shillong, Meghalaya. He currently serves as the director of Don Bosco Youth Center, Shillong, where he is actively involved in empowering young people through skill development, education, and value-based formation. With this, we would like to start our session 2, which is Human Capital, Investment in Education, Skill Development, and Employment. As we get to know human capital, it is the ability of the human or the human resources to contribute to economic development. And with this, we would like to see the investment in education, which is one of the major factors, and employment and also skill development at the end. The thing is, a developed nation or a developing nation requires more than infrastructure or more than just natural resources. The main important thing is human resources and human capital as well. And today we are discussing on the same thing. Firstly, I would like to put on a question to Dr. Benjamin Langdon, sir. Sir, you have been an associate professor in Department of Tourism and Hotel Management, and you have an experience of more than 20 years in this teaching field. I would like to ask, what's your view or insights on today's theme? We have human capital, investment in education, skill development, and employment. And since there's a rise of tourism and hotel management in our region, Northeast, so what's your insights and take on that, sir?
Thank you so much for that question. Well, to get straight to the point, when we say human capital, basically we mean that every human being, we sitting here, everyone here in the hall, we are all resources. And when we say that we are a resource, it means that we should have this ability, this capability to produce something, to do something, to provide a service. Then only you will be considered as a human capital. So human capital basically means a human being who is a resource. Now, for this resource to have this capability, this ability to produce something, to provide a service, investment in education then becomes extremely important. And education basically is everything, because a person can be literate or illiterate, but there is no one who is uneducated. Everyone is educated in their own field. Whether you have gone to school or not, you will always be educated through life experiences, through interaction with people, how you interact and respond to the environment around you. Everyone becomes educated. And education is the only way in which we can really make our human capital take off. These two things, they go together. Now, at the center of these two concepts is another construct which we call skill development. There was a time when we used to talk only about knowledge. And we test knowledge, we have a mark sheet, and the mark sheet tells the reader or the employer, prospective employer, about the quality of this particular person, the capital, the level of education that he has. In due course of time, we said knowledge is not enough, we need skills also. That is why this aspect of skill development. Today, we are using a term called competency. Competency means a combination of three things: knowledge, skills, and attitude. You see, because a person can be very knowledgeable, but if you don't have the skills, your knowledge, basically, I'll not say it's useless, but your knowledge will lack teeth in society. But at the same time, we find people who are very knowledgeable, very skillful, but they do not have the attitude to work, to take initiative. They do not have drive, motivation. They do not want to do certain things in life. So even if you have knowledge and skills, if you don't have the attitude, again, it's not going to work for you. That's why we say now it's all about competency. People should have competency, because we say if a person is competent, it means that he has knowledge also, he has skills also, and he has the right attitude also. And the last one is employment. You see, if we are productive as a human capital, we are educated, and then we have the right competencies with us, employment opportunities are always there. Let's not look only at the government sector or even just the private sector. There are areas where all of us can be employed one way or the other. That is why it's important to talk now in terms of competency, because that attitude is the ultimate factor, sometimes which is more important than knowledge and skills also. However, we talk a lot about education, investment in education. One of the areas that we actually have to look at is mental health issues. There's no point making our youth educated and try so hard investment in education and talk about skills and all that if their mental well-being, is not there. It is not on the right track. Mental health issue, depression, anxiety is one of the major health problems we have today. Many of our youths, we are somehow, suffering from this, to be very blunt. And I think the percentage is pretty high. I'll not mention here. So unless and until we take care of this particular aspect also, it's very difficult for a person to be productive in the correct term of a capital or skill or competency. I think this is one aspect that sometimes we miss out on. We talk about all these other things, but one of the very important pillar, which is the mental health issue, depression, anxiety, we forget that. Unless and until we deal with this particular aspect also, then it'll be very difficult for anyone to work productively. That is why it's very good now in schools and colleges, it has been made mandatory that you should have counselors. But sometimes the counselor cannot meet the needs of everyone. A school or college can have thousands of students, right? So me as a teacher, I can try to play my own role here, but I think it requires a collective effort. Education means also mental health. And I'm sorry to say this is one aspect which we actually do not talk about too much. We are too much into science and numbers and sociology and everything. We forget about this. If this is not in place, everything will have no meaning at all.
Thank you so much, sir, for the amazing highlight on education, skill development, and employment. And the most important, the mental health, which is mental health in some areas, it's still considered as a taboo, which is not talked often. Even young people like us, we hesitate a lot to talk about mental health. Me, myself, as a student, and I have also been an activist in mental health and thing. So me, myself, as per my research and stuff, I still feel that there is a lack of open conversation about this particular topic. Thank you so much, sir, for highlighting it. The youth are present here today. They get this insight that it is very important to talk about mental health as well. Here I would like to put a question that as a professor, you already said you're trying your best from your end to connect with the students in this thing. I would like to know what other things which you like to implement or which you wish to be there so that the mental health is talked about, and how, as you already mentioned, that mental health is very important by linking it with education, skill development, and employment. So what do you wish to, that this mental health is considered as a very normal topic and the young people can freely talk about?
It has to start from the family. Because if they don't share in the family, then it'll be very difficult for them to share anywhere else. I know there are situations where students are more open with friends in schools and colleges and universities, and they don't talk much in the family. That is also all right. Teachers are there, friends are there. But I think we should talk in the family. It has to start from the family, because your friends are there for some time, your teachers, your school, your colleges, they are there, but for some time. Your family is there with you forever. So you need to discuss this and start with the family. And here is one very important point. Basically, there are two types of people, introvert and extrovert. Now, if you have a mental health issue and you're also an introvert, then this becomes sort of a red flag, because then you're not talking to anyone about it. That is why I prefer for the young minds today, for the youth, to actually be extroverts. You have to be extroverts. Then only you will start talking about everything to other people. And this again has to start from the family. Many times we come from very conservative families and we are taught in the family itself, do not talk too much. Okay, do not talk too much, do not be too much of a blah, 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 blah sort of a person. Be an introvert. Now this has got its own plus points, but I think when it comes to mental health, people, the young minds, the youth will have to be extroverts. Then only you will share with your family. Then only you will share with your friends, with your teachers, okay? And it's very important for family now, for parents to be friends with their children. This principle of carrot and stick, where you reward them when they do well and you beat them when they don't, I think it still has its validity even today, but it's more important for us to be friends with them. Unless we are friends at the same level, it becomes very difficult to discuss with them on these type of issues. And mental health is something which normally the young people do not like to look eye to eye when they talk. So I always used to say something like this: the best time to talk about mental health to your children is when you are driving your car and your child is sitting next to you. What will happen is that you don't have to look eye to eye. You are driving your car, she is sitting over there, but the message, it gets through, right? So that is the best way to talk about mental health. Simple solutions, practical solutions. Let's not talk too much in terms of big things that we have to look at, big investments that we look at. The world has problems, and the solutions to most of these problems are actually micro solutions, which we can implement right from, to start with, always from home and always from the family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. With this wonderful insight, we get to know that investment in education, skill development, and employability requires a healthy human, and mostly us, human capital. It requires a healthy human capital. And basically, it's not just about physical fitness or physically health, but then it's all about mental health as well, because everything is in the mind. And to make our nation, if you dream about a Viksit Bharat, we would like to have healthy young people in our nation. And basically, it's not only about physical health and stuff, it's also about mental health as well. So thank you so much for bringing out this topic. We are really happy to hear from you. Next, we would like to move to Audrey, ma'am. She is a skill development officer. Ma'am, I would like to know your insights on skill development in youth as we are moving towards Viksit Bharat. And we would consider that youth are the leading leaders, not just for tomorrow, but today as well. So how a youth from our nation can contribute towards Viksit Bharat while through their skill development. And you can give your insights on skill development in our region, Northeast as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Bhumika, for this platform. Yes, speaking about youth and human capital in terms of skill development, first we need to understand what human capital is. When we speak about human capital, it refers to the skill, the knowledge, and the ability of young people, who contributes to the growth of the nation as well as to the state. So investment in education and skill development is very, very important to strengthen the human capital, and it also improves productivity, innovation, and creativity. So when we speak about education, of course education builds a strong foundation of knowledge, but in terms of skill development perspective, training ensures students or make a youth a job ready and market ready to enter into a job force. Now, in a state in the state of Meghalaya, to be very specific, where the larger chunk of the population are youths. So investing in skill development will really promote human capital, because this will ultimately support sustainable development, and also it will also contribute to the vision of the Viksit Bharat of 2047. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful insights on skill development. Ma'am, I would also like to know how can we reduce youth unemployment by aligning curriculars with industry needs, since you are in a skill development office. So my question is, how can we reduce youth unemployment by aligning curriculum with industry needs through online platforms or vocational reforms? How can a youth be employed through their skill learning? Like, see, our education system has been based from ages that, as sir said, knowledge is very important. But then today we get to know our degree is not only the factor which will keep us going. Skill development is also a necessary factor as well.
Right.
So what's your insight on how can we address the skill development in our curriculum in school level or college level as aligning with national education policy as well?
Right, okay. Yes, aligning education and skill development is very, very important, to make youth job ready and to, future ready. Especially like in the state of Meghalaya, when we have seen that the government is playing a very important role in promoting skill development initiative in the state. And the kind of trainings and the kind of, skilling activities that is being implemented is not aligned to the education system that is being introduced in our schools and colleges. So, but how do we achieve this, how do we bridge this gap? So now we can only bridge skill training and education by incorporating vocational trainings in schools and colleges, which is more aligned to industry needs and which is more aligned to, the kind of the job demands that is there in the market. And emphasizing, when we talk about vocational training, we can emphasize more on hands-on training, which are more practical based. And we can also, promote vocational training by connecting schools with industries, like in terms of internship programs, in terms of apprenticeship programs, and introducing, on-job trainings. And yes, when it comes to skilling as a whole, the government is trying to implement training which are more demand-driven, you see, rather than supply. And yes, we are trying to, the state of Meghalaya is working very much on, decentralizing all the skill training program in the state. That means the kind of skilling that we implement in the state should match the industry need, as well as should match the aspiration of our youths.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful insight on the topic. Now I would like to address Father Michael Macri, sir. You've been the Salesian priest of Don Bosco and a dynamic youth leader, and you're serving as director of Don Bosco Youth Center. The question is, how does Don Bosco Youth Center, Shillong, approach skill development and value-based formation to empower youth in Northeast India, since we have a gathering of all the youth from Northeast? So let them have the insight of how Don Bosco Youth Center is contributing, and let them get an insight on that thing as well.
Thank you very much to our beautiful and gorgeous moderator. Let us give her a big round of applause. And a good afternoon to my dear panelists, and to all of you, my dear young people, especially to our organizers. Very nice. You organize, you bring young people like this for the betterment of our region. How many of you can whistle? Raise your hand. How many of you can whistle? How many of you can smile? How many of you can smile? You have got the capacity in you. You have got the capacity in you. You have got so much of talents. You have so much of energy. And that is what is beautiful in our region. That's why so many people are jealous of Northeast India. It's because we are so talented. We are so smart. By the way, how many minutes do I have? How many minutes do I have?
So you can speak, you have plenty
Oh,
of
okay,
minutes.
very good. So prepare yourself, because you know I am a priest. I can give lecture the whole day also, so prepare for that. Thank you, thank you. Is that a compliment, or is that... oh, okay, thank you. Let me begin like this. You know, there is this monastery, this beautiful monastery. But the sad thing is that in that monastery, there are no more monks, because people don't want to become monks anymore. They enjoy life outside, so they don't want to enter the monastery anymore. The director of that monastery got a very, very bright idea. He said, let me go to the market. I will announce free food, free lodging for all those who come to the monastery. And so he went to the market, he made the announcement, and the following day, thousands of young people, boys, stood in line to enter the monastery. And the director was very, very happy. He was smiling. He was welcoming all of them. He was welcoming all of them, and he said, welcome to the monastery. Here in the monastery, everything is free, but there are few rules and regulations, he said. Number one, you have to keep silent all the time. You have to keep silent. Secondly, you have to also work. Thirdly, you have to also pray. And fourth and most important rule in the monastery is you cannot talk with one another. You can talk only 2 words in a year, and that also with the director, not among yourself. Is it clear? And many of them said, yes, sir. 2 words, right? Yes, sir. And with that, he put them inside the monastery according to their own rooms. In January, February, March, April, December 31st, this director rang the bell and said, those who would like to come and say those 2 words, please come and say. So many of them came out from the room. The first one came and said, praise God, 2 words, right? Praise God. The other one came and said, my God. And like that, many of them. Last one, he looks quite shabby, not really dressed. His eyes was sulking. Maybe whole night he was on the phone. He came, he looked at the director, and the director asked him, what is the 2 words? He said, food bad. Food bad. Okay, I'll make sure your second year, I will make the food better. And so the second year continued. January, February, March, 31st December, he rang again the bell. And he said, those who would like to say those 2 words, please come and say those 2 words. And again, many of them came out. Again, my God, my Lord. And our friends came again. Again, with sleepiness in his eyes. The director asked him, what is your 2 words? He said, bed hard. Bed hard. The bed is hard. In the first year, he complained about the food. Second year, he complained about the bed. Okay, well, I will give you a nice mattress. From tomorrow onwards, you will be sleeping like a king. And so he was happy. He went inside. Now, this is the final year. January, February, 31st December, he rang the bell. And those who would like to say the 2 words, please come and say it to me. This time, all of them came out. One said, my God. Some said, thank you. And our last friend came from behind, and he said, I quit. I quit. This is the words of the director. Yes, I know you will quit because you don't have the spirit of endurance. Right from the beginning of your stay here in the monastery, you were only complaining. Complaining about food, complaining about this, about government, about chief ministers, about prime ministers, complaining, but you don't have discipline, you don't have the spirit of endurance. That's why you will quit. And I'm glad that you quit. Dear young people, firstly I ask you, how many of you can smile? You smile and many of you raise your hands. How many of you can whistle? How many of you can play football? We have so much of capital in the Northeast India. But what we lack is discipline. What we lack is the spirit of endurance. Our moderator asked me about how do we do in the youth center. I'm very, very sad to say this. We failed terribly in the youth center because we cannot make young people disciplined. Few years ago, before the COVID, we have lots of training in the youth center. It's not only in Shillong. We have all youth centers in different parts of Northeast. I know in Itanagar, I know in Kohima, I know in Mizoram, I know in all the places in the Northeast India. We have our youth centers, either run by the Don Bosco Fathers or other organizations. And even from the Skill India, we have so many this kind of programs there in the Northeast India. But the problem is this: we don't have discipline, we don't have the spirit of endurance. So let me tell, since she asked me about Don Bosco Youth Center, I said we failed. Prior to COVID, in the youth center, we have trainings on computers, on IT, on media. That's why we have got some of our staff here who are doing the media for us. We run also a TV channel. We have so many courses. We have tailoring, we have embroidery. In 2019, we trained only in this tailoring sectors almost 500 young people. And out of the 500 young people, I selected 23 of them to go and work with JJ Mills Industry in Chennai, one of the very, very famous